Hi, welcome back to the unemployment series. In my previous video, I explained the many factors that are responsible for unemployment in our country. But in this video, I will be discussing how unemployment is a threat to our welfare, be it our health, happiness, comfort, and how we just relate with one another. My name is Susan Wanjiku. I'm the founder of Wanjiku's Eye, and here I discuss the relationship between economic development and governance so that you can understand, engage, and influence the matters that affect you and I. Welcome to Wanjiku's Eye. Now, to be a good economist and a good leader, there is one skill that you must have, and that is you have to be able to put yourself in the shoes of the people that you're attempting to study so that you can clearly understand the problems that you're trying to solve. So, for example, you're going to have to ask yourself, how are these people thinking? Why are they behaving the way they are behaving? So even though unemployment is an economic concept, for us to understand the negative impact of unemployment, we really have to get into the minds of the people who are unemployed, and that is psychology. So for this particular one, we'll see what are some of the behaviors of people who are struggling to find decent work. And here we're not just talking about people without jobs, but also people who have been forced to do certain jobs because they can't find what they want, the kind of jobs that they want. So as I explain this, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the unemployed person. And this is not to make excuses for anyone, but it's just for us to have a better understanding of how all these affect and impact society. Now, all human beings have some natural needs, like to live a life of dignity, being able to afford food, to live in a clean and safe environment, to have clothes, to have a decent and private place to go to the toilet. And if you have a family, you have to be able to provide for them. So you need a source of income, because how are you going to be able to afford yourself? So you also want people to value you, and you also want to feel good about yourself. You want to feel confident, and you also want to feel that in whatever that you're doing, you're fulfilled and you're living up to your fullest potential. That is a need. So when these needs are not being met, we end up with some problems in society. And number one is the most obvious one, and this is poverty. Now, poverty isn't just measured in terms of not having money. There's something called multidimensional poverty, which looks at if you're deprived of other important things like health, education, nutrition, water, sanitation, an economic activity, housing, information, etc. But here's the thing. In most instances, you're going to need money to be able to access all the rest. So in Kenya, if you live in the urban areas and you earn less than 6,000 Kenya shillings per month or $42 per month, then you're poor if we're just looking at money. Then in the rural areas, if you earn below 4,000 Kenya shillings or $28 a month, you're considered poor. So those are by the strict definitions, strict statistics. So if you earn 5,000 Kenya shillings per month while living in the rural areas, or 7,000 bob a month while living in the urban areas, you're not considered poor by the strict sense in statistics. But think about it. If you're living in Nairobi, how far can 7,000 bob, for example, surely take you? That's around $56. So imagine if you have a family. So that's why statistics show that 1 out of 3 Kenyans, which translates to 15.9 million Kenyans, are poor in terms of money. Yet 53% of Kenyans, or 23.4 million Kenyans, are deprived of at least 3 basic needs. And that's because you can have money, but that money can barely cater for your needs. So what's the consequence of poverty? So according to statistics, a majority of Kenyans earn around 20 to 30,000 Kenya shillings per month. That's the majority. That's around 140 to 220 dollars a month. You can imagine with this figure, one is supposed to afford food, rent, transport, water, electricity, hospital bills, insurance, school fees maybe, all those needs before you can think about anything else. And then in some cases, you might have to give up some things. Like now you're forced to walk to work because you can't afford fare to go to work. So for some other families, they've actually had to give up having 3 meals a day, and instead they only have 1 meal a day, or even none. So poverty is that thing that puts the country on a downward spiral. Because since people have less disposable income or money to spend, then who are the businesses going to sell to? Remember, businesses will more often than not do whatever it takes to protect their profits so that they can also survive. So if business isn't doing so well and there aren't enough people to buy their stuff, then sometimes they decide to lay off some people, or they just choose not to hire any more people. So if you don't have a source of income, how are you going to survive? Which leads me to my next point. Unemployment strains other family members financially. And this is because many unemployed people rely on other family members who have the ability to take care of them. But it can become overburdening. For example, when we look at the issue of black tax. Black tax is a duty that children have to support their extended family members financially. So this could be your parents, siblings, uncles, cousins, etc. And it's called black tax because it's mainly associated with people of color. It's a system thing. So if you come from a poor background, but somehow you manage to break free from poverty, then you become financially responsible for other people in the family. And this can become very, very straining for the person who is just starting out. And even without the black tax, imagine if your parents live in Runda and you're unable to secure a job, they'll still feel a sense of duty to support you because you're not financially independent. And then number 3, unemployment leads to crime and insecurity. And this is because of desperation. People are desperate to survive and people are pissed off. A good example of this was during the COVID-19 pandemic, when many people lost their jobs, and because of how the Kenyan economy is set up, work from home cannot apply to a majority of Kenyans. And one of the immediate results that we saw when people lost their jobs is that there was a lot of crime. Many gangs came up, people getting robbed at knife point, there was mugging, carjacking, border crimes, assault and murder. And we see the same violent crimes happening in South Africa and Nigeria, economies that are almost similar to Kenya. And by similar, I mean they look rich, but in the real essence, it's just a few people who are rich while the majority are surviving or struggling. But even without the violent crimes in Kenya, we've had incidences of people getting jailed for years for stealing a chicken to feed their family. So if this person was a breadwinner of the family, you can imagine what becomes the fate of that family. So food for thought. Then on top of that, unemployment is a threat to national security, especially when it comes to the issues of terrorism. Now, investigations concerning terrorist activities have found that one thing that makes Kenya a hub for terrorists is how the government runs the country and how that affects the economy. For example, it's known globally that we have a very corrupt government. We've had very corrupt governments, and that affects our economy. And the politics that we have doesn't push the government to become better. So the heads of the terror groups understand this environment and exploit the vulnerability of young people because of their socioeconomic status. So most times the young people who are being targeted for this indoctrination into terrorism are mostly unemployed youth from poor backgrounds who are treated as insignificant by the government, minority groups like Muslims. So the terror groups use these circumstances to justify terrorism as a means to an end. So for them, it's an opportune moment. For example, as they recruit the young people, they'll be told that they're poor, the reason they're poor and unemployed is because of corruption and an economic system that exploits them, that the government doesn't care about their needs, and in fact, the government harasses them. And the only way to fix such a system is by doing what? Using terrorist activities as a sort of revolution regardless of the casualties. And this is because terrorism destabilizes a country, whether economically, socially, and politically. So the recruits are made to believe that they're building up a new social, political, and economic system by tearing down the old one first. They're given the promise of a better future, and in some cases, the terror groups even go as far as paying their families. So they're taught a belief system without really questioning what it is that they are being taught, because they are vulnerable. But just for the record, radicalization isn't always bad. It's through radicalization that we had freedom fighters who sacrificed their lives for our independence. But in this case, it's the radicalization into violent extremism that I'm talking about. Now, another negative impact that unemployment has on society is that it contributes to mental health issues. And this is a very underrated one, because in Africa, we still equate mental health issues with madness. So how does this happen? Remember that unemployment robs you all an opportunity to earn a living so that you can be able to meet your basic needs at the very least and provide for your family if you have one. And if you're unable to do this, it has an effect on your self-esteem because you're vulnerable. Now, I believe most self-respecting adults take pride in being able to provide for themselves in whatever capacity. But now that you have to rely on other people for your survival, it takes away your self-esteem. And you can't even plan your life. So research shows that unemployed people are likely to suffer from psychological distress like frustration, anxiety, hopelessness, and feeling helpless. Helpless because you feel like you have little or no influence about the events in your life, because you need money to survive, to access healthcare, for transport, to date, to start a family, to socialize, to invest. So being unable to participate in these social and economic activities can give rise to feelings of shame, disappointment, and completely isolating yourself and distancing yourself from friends and family. And this is how people end up with depression and committing suicide. Then others end up committing suicide because their families sold everything so that they could be able to take them to school, so that they become the saving grace of the family, to be that kid that takes their family out of poverty. So the family painfully manages to take them to university, they graduate, only to end up tarmacking. And also, this unemployment situation just strains relations. So in the worst case scenario, you find this frustration being taken out on other people, either through domestic violence or gender-based violence. And in these cases, the unemployed person could be either the victim or the offender. Remember, it's acting out of frustration. Then there's other brutal acts, like we've had of parents who've burned their child's hands because of stealing something like 10 Kenya shillings. So did you know that being unemployed for years can cause trauma? And that also not having a fulfilling job can be a source of mental distress. Human beings are just wired and created that way. Now, number 6 is that research has shown that there is a relationship between unemployment and drug and substance abuse. Now, this is the thing with drugs. Most people take drugs to calm down from the stresses of life. So for example, you get stressed, you have a drink, you relax. You want to forget the pressures of the world, you pick up a joint. These are all forms of coping mechanisms, but not the positive ones. Because it's all fun and games until you become dependent on the drug. And did you also know that most people who commit, especially the very violent crimes, are normally under the influence of some drug? Because what do drugs do? They impair your judgment. They numb you and prevent you from making good decisions. So reports say that young people are abusing drugs because they're trying to cope with the joblessness issue in Kenya. Someone has dreams of becoming a biochemist, but penye maisha imemfikisha, the most that they can get is pulling a mkokoteni. But this issue is a complex one, and the men from Central Kenya are a good example of this. There have been instances where their women have demonstrated asking the government to intervene because their husbands are drinking too much and haven't worked for months in some cases. Worked for months in some cases and for years in other cases. And the men are complaining that they're drinking because they're frustrated because there are no jobs and also because of poverty. But on the other hand, there are also allegations that the reverse is true, that they're not getting jobs because they are always drinking and they don't want to work. That's why I said it's a complex problem. So drug abuse is high in Nairobi, Mombasa, and Western and other parts. Being idle and peer pressure are listed as major factors pushing people to sample drugs, which could ultimately lead to drug abuse. Then another big one is that unemployment can lead to a rise in divorce and breakdown in marriages. Now, there's more than enough evidence to show that finances and financial strain and issues to do with finance are one of the leading contributors of the divorce. But the opposite is also true. The young people are taking longer to get married now because how are they going to afford to raise a family without a job or a source of income? Then finally, all this desperation gives way for new culture and different forms of exploitation. For example, we have the sponsor culture, where young women maintain sexual relations with much older men, old enough to be their fathers because they rely on them for upkeep so that they can also support their families. Then on the flip side, we have the Ben 10 situation where very young men maintain sexual relations with much older women because they also rely on them for their upkeep. Then we also have people engaging in prostitution that has been there for a while. Then in some parts of the country, we have girls offering sex so that they can be paid, so that they can afford pads or sanitary towels. And in other areas of this country, people are paying for water with sex. Then in other cases, we have young girls being married off very early on so that the family can earn an income by selling off these girls. So I know we like to sensationalize these things so that we can just have a debate for the sake of debate and to also shame others. But to understand these things, you need to ask yourself, if all these people had a choice, would things be different? If their circumstances were different, would they still engage in these things? Sometimes it's difficult to see other people's reality when you're not in it. But if you had absolutely no opportunity to make an honest living, I want you as a person watching this to think to yourself, what would you be pushed to do? Food for thought. Now, I've not included many statistics in this one because social issues can be quite complicated and a lot of proper research hasn't been done. But this should even be a call to action, this video, So guys, if you can relate to any of these things, please share with us in the comments. Usiogope, nothing is going to happen to you. But the bottom line is unemployment robs people of choice. Unemployment destabilizes our country in so many ways. And as you've seen, the ripple effect is that it becomes damaging to families and to countries as a whole, because people are barely thinking straight out of desperation. No one is ever their true self when they're in survival mode. So in my next video, I'll touch on the economic cost of unemployment. If you like this video, make sure you like it, make sure you share it, and please do not forget to subscribe so that the algorithm can do its thing and so that other people can get to see this video. But as always, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Cheers.